What's up, Goalie crowd? Thanks for tuning in to our deep dive on the 2018 Brines Optic Goalie Pads. For anybody who watched the live videos that we did at Instagram, thanks for tuning in. I just wanted to take some time and really do this justice and try and improve the video quality for the videos that are going to be living on the website and the YouTube. So this video will be very similar to what we did on Instagram earlier this week. However, the quality should be much higher for anybody that's kind of watching this down the road. Purchasing a pair of leg pads is a big commitment this day and age, so I want to make sure that people are able to fully see all of the bells and whistles on this gear, as well as a high in-depth comparison to an older genetic as well as the 1S. So first things first, let's take a look at the colorway and the custom colors that I picked here on my Brines genetic. For anybody that participated in our Instagram contest and voted the solid colored plaid crew the winner, I sincerely appreciate that and hope to do the crowd well. So if we take a look here at the Optic, you can see that the pad is all red. However, I thought that might be a tad too boring, so I tried to mix in a couple different textures of red just to give the pad a little bit of pop and a little bit of extra style. So if we really zoom in here on the boot, you can see that we got the weave on the outer roll and that the base for the material is matte, and then we have the Primo sliding surface. The main other detail here on the pad is the B-Star logo. So if you're not familiar with it and you're ordering custom from Brines, this star here is actually a detail where you can pick the color of Gen Pro that goes inside of it. And I went with an antique gold so that it kind of matches the stock Brines logo that you would see in the catalogs. And just for reference, here's a look at the Brines logo from the 2017 catalog, which is the logo that I was kind of trying to copy with my pad logo. So again, that star in there is the antique. So as we take our deep dive into the pads, we're going to start at the leg channel, review some of the specs, some of the technology inside the leg channel, and then move over to a comparison between an older genetic and the 1S pad. One of the interesting things about getting a little bit early access to the Optic here is that I was trying to keep my set as stock as possible so that what I'm reviewing for the website and in this video is exactly what you would go into the store and order. Anybody that follows our account on Instagram knows that I'm way into gear mods and would have had a ton of fun customizing these pads. I don't condone customization for the sake of customization by any means, just drives up the cost of the equipment, complicates building the equipment for the OEM themselves, and makes you wait longer to get your gear. However, I got a pretty good sense in time how I like my gear. So this will be a really interesting exercise for me to go with the fully stock pad, and should be a ton of fun and really should give us some interesting content and a great review. So let's dive into the leg. So first things first, we're going to start at the very top of the pad, and you can see that Brines uses their Primo material around the top edges here of the pad on the sidewall. And the interesting thing about that is that, up here is obviously not a sliding area. And even though the Primo material will slide better than a weave or standard Gen Pro, the material was initially incorporated into Brines equipment as a high wear material and was used in a lot of places where the pad would traditionally wear out, in the boots or in the knee area on some of the older gens. So it's a really nice touch to wrap that Primo on there in one of the high wear areas on the pads. And as we'll take a look at on some of my other pads, I mean, this is a known wear area with some of the other pads on the market that are pretty popular right now. So now we take a look at the back of the pad with the thigh rise here. People are pretty well aware that I got custom embroidery on this pad, and you're probably wondering where my logo is. Brines actually moved it to the outer wrap on this pad down at the calf, and we'll take a look at that in a bit. So the first interesting piece on this here is this Velcro pad. And if we look over here, we've got this tab tucked in, and here we have this tab tucked out. What this tab is it allows you to connect it to the Brines genetic knee pads, which come stock with the Optic. It's part of the purchase. And you can see that the genetic pads, knee pads here, have this Velcro flap. This Velcros right into there so that you've got nice connection. You're going to get a good connected feel between your knee guard and your pad, and should also help your pad from slipping down during usage. And when I'm saying pad here, I mean it'll stop the knee pad from slipping down into the leg pad and getting. Just going to take a quick look at actually putting that into place. You can slide the Velcro down, just that easy, and the knee guard is now attached into the leg channel up into the knee area, and as you can see, fits in very, very nicely exactly where you want it to. Next thing here we're going to take a look at is the knee cradle and the landing area. This is something that's been extremely simplified versus any of the previous genetic models or previous Sub-Zero models. You'll see that we don't have any hex air or the SBA non-slip grip material in this area on the pad, and Brines usually had one of those technologies in this area. We still do have the removable out of flap, so for anybody not utilizing this with the X Smart Strap, you can just unlace that and open the knee channel up even further. And this here is just a graphic for the Optic. It is not a grip material by any means. So this whole design with this knee cradle is supposed to be very, very open and very, very good rotation. Your knee is going to slide in this very well in a positive way, in the sense that the pad's going to rotate around your knee. If we move over to the knee cradle, you can see we have the landing, we have the block, and we'll get to the inner gusset in a little bit. So the first thing, if we take a look at it from this angle, you'll notice that this has a 45-degree cutout. And the purpose of that is to give you some relief from your strapping, your knee guards, or your pants as you're moving. And going with this 45-degree cutout allowed Brines to go to their biggest knee block ever. So you're going to have a big, stable landing surface within the butterfly. So the stock knee landing on this pad is what Brines calls a medium soft. If anybody wants a firmer landing on their knee block, you can also order these with a hard knee block. I personally like my knee blocks as soft as possible. So this is one of the areas of the pads I'm most curious to touch and see how medium actually stacks up compared to a soft that I'm used to. But I mean, it is a very nice beefy knee block. You can see here, and as well, it's got the Primo in this area for the wear, and then in these two areas for sliding. One of the other features here too, which may be a little bit hard to see on camera, but we can just see the start of it, is lacing. This is a new feature for the Optic pad that was pretty common on most of the pro stock pads that Brines was building for the NHL guys, or the really savvy consumers were ordering. The point of lacing, and you can see there's some of the lacing down there as well. The point of lacing the knee block in is that it actually pulls the knee block tighter to the pad and gives you a more connected feel during use, and it's going to give you a better seal in your butterfly, and it's going to give you more control during your butterfly slides. So it really makes the pad, again, more connected, better sealing, better sliding by going with this laced in design. So hopefully that's coming well through on the camera and you can really see what's going on. And you can see here 2 huge sheets of Velcro. So you're gonna get good connection between the knee landing and the knee block. And then you can also kind of customize how you have your smart strap if you want to make it a little bit longer, a little bit lower, or have it sit anywhere else within that landing. Next thing to consider is the Smart Strap X Strap. So this is a 2nd generation Smart Strap technology, and this Smart Strap is going to be most closely with the genetic pad. So we have 2 different sets of Velcro that we can use. There's this one thinner strap here, which is double thick Velcro. It can be worn up there, which will actually form an X pattern if we look over there. It could be worn high across the calf and connect in there with one of the inner wraps and form something similar to an elastic professor strap. And then if we look at the main smart strap here, again, this is the X strap that's designed with the knee lock Velcro to be worn down around the calf, and then the 2 X straps there around the calf. So you're going to get security in 3 places out of that strap, and a very wide open design. So I'm going to tinker with these obviously a bit, try them some different ways, but I think out of the gate I'm going to go with that setup. So this will be in the professor strap kind of mode right here. We actually take a look inside the leg channel itself. So as we dive further down into the calf area in the pad, we'll see a couple things. So we've got the inner wraps here, and we've got the X-Static material inside the pad. So X-Static is material that Brines has used for quite many years. I've got these on my original genetics, which are about 5 years old, and this is a material I also had inside of Brine's chest protector. Works really, really well for moisture wicking and also odor control. The silver steel fibers that you're seeing are actually silver material, like I just said, and those help with the odor control. So this is an area that could potentially kind of get hot and sweaty on the pad. If you've got your wraps, very close together, that's one of the few areas you kind of might sweat in your pad. Next thing is we kind of look to the right of the leg cradle here is we have a removable air pillow. So this is designed to give the pad a really plush, soft, supple feel. As we go down in the butterfly, and as well, it's going to remove any gap in there, so that's going to give you a little bit extra stability. But if that's not something you're interested in, Velcro's out that easily. In terms of weight, I mean, this thing literally weighs nothing, so I wouldn't have anybody freaking out if this is adding extra weight to the pad as well. As we look inside the inner gusset wrap here, you can see that we have part of the smart strapping system that goes around to the outer calf rack, and this is fully adjustable. There's a loop here so you can make this shorter if you want to wear your pads tighter. And this system applies all throughout the smart strap. So every single piece of the smart strap has a loop system there that can be fully adjusted to make this looser or tighter depending on how you wear it. I'm a huge fan of elastic straps, and maybe not for the obvious reason of weight reduction, which is why they were initially brought on the market, in my opinion, by Brines on the initial Sub-Zero pad, which was a huge hit, and every single company in the industry has basically gone that way after Brines went that way. One of the reasons I think the elastic strapping is great is because you can wear the pad very tight to your leg, get everything nicely snug like that on your legs so you feel very connected, very quick, very agile on the net, but at the same point, because the elastic gives, as you go down into the butterfly, it's still going to allow the pad to rotate around your legs. So you can wear it tighter than you could ever wear leather straps. It saves weight and it's going to rotate just as well. And if you ever want to replace a strap, Brine sells these kits. They're very inexpensive. Goalie Monkey, Pure Hockey, Goalie Crease, anywhere will sell them, and you can just lace in a new set and go. So it's much easier to replace than leather straps. So it's a really, really great system. However, if you wanted leather straps in your pads for any reason, that's definitely an option that you can customize on the Genetic. As well, the lining inside the leg cradle here is the nylon as well, which is going to really increase the ability of this pad to rotate around your leg. There's going to be nothing hindering it there, nothing gripping it. But at the same point, if you wanted the Hexair material or you wanted the SBA gray non-slip material, either of those are available as a custom options from. So as we make our way down to the boot area in the pad, you'll see that we've got nylon here, which again is going to help the pad rotate and reduce weight. And then we've got the Primo material right there in the heavy wear section. We've got the smart toe strap on this pad, and I took the boot strap, heel strap off on this one, just playing around with it. But if we take a look at this pad, here is the stock boot strap. This can be worn in two completely different fashions. It can be worn down like that in the traditional fashion, or it can be worn back around the heel like that with the Lundy strap. One of the other interesting things too is this smart heel strap is fully adjustable. Just like the smart strap system, you've got the loops everywhere on the pad. So you pull this through, you slide the loop down to shorten it and reduce the amount of slack, and you can wear this boot strap extremely snug if you want. And if you've never seen this up close, it's basically a seatbelt material, so it's going to be very, very durable. It's going to move very, very well. You can kind of see the motion here in the video, much more pliable than a leather strap. So really a great material. I've not worn a boot strap or a Lundy strap. I've actually never tried the Lundy strap, but went no boot strap 3 or 4 years ago and never really looked back. So this is another option that, in the spirit of trying a stock pad, I'm going to try it. If I were in Vegas kind of betting on anything, I would bet that I'll probably remove the boot strap just to kind of get it dialed into how I like to wear my pad. Very tight in the calf area, no boot strap, and then an elastic toe strap, but we'll see. I mean, maybe I love the Lundy loop and we'll go with that. That's a really nice thing about these pads is even if you're going stock, with all the different adjustability into it, you can really tune the pad to how you want to. So before we get down to the smart toe strap, one of the simple kind of innovations on this pad here is that there's a loop on there. The purpose of this loop is so that you can slide a skate lace through it and tie your pads together and sling them over your shoulder if you don't want to throw them in your bag going back and forth. So we just take the skate lace, loop it through the pad, loop it through the next pad, and then tie it together. I think this is a great solution. What I actually used to do in my older genetics is not having the boot strap. I did have this flap. So if you have an existing Brines product and you're not using the boot strap, you can kind of run the skate lace through there. But this is going to be much easier. Kind of threading this needle sometimes can be a bit of a nuisance, and especially I play men's league. You know, games are at midnight. Last thing I want to do is fuss around with this. So going through this wide open loop here, I think is a really nice subtle touch. You know, just making things easier getting in and out of the rink, in and out of your bag. So that's great. So one of the few customized options I have on these pads here are the smart toe straps. So I used the first gen smart toe straps when I was using 1/100 skates with the cowling and had no problem at all with them. Then I switched to a cowlingless skate, the Bauer One S, and found that the elastic straps were too long and I felt the toe became very sloppy. And that's when I switched to my pro laces. And if we take a look over here, you can see I've got my pro laces on both my genetics and my 1S pads. Huge fan of pro laces, really don't have anything negative to say about them, but it will be interesting to try the newer, shorter intermediate toe straps, which again was a custom option. The stock ones will be the senior length, but very easy option to get customized will be to go with the shorter toe straps. And just for comparison, let's put these side by side with the pro lace to see how long they are. So as you can see, they're both pretty similar in length. We take a look here and just kind of stretch that out. You can see that they're very, very similar in length. So just out of an unboxing mode, you know, I think the smart toe strap might work for me. We'll see the one other big difference between the smart toe and like the pro laces is that Brines has Primo tipped right here, versus if we look at the pro laces here on the genetics, your boot's going to go right in there, and I do one crisscross in the front, and that's it. So why I feel like this makes a big difference is that this Primo material is going to kind of replicate having 2 or 3 knots like you would if you had a traditional skate lace toe tie. So the smart toe strap, in my opinion, is going to give you a little bit more of a traditional feel like a skate lace. And the pro laces, being all elastic, are going to have a little bit more of a bungier, springier feel. So it's just more of a preference, but again, excited to try these. And the other things Brine's changed since my last generation of the Brines branded elastic smart toe straps is the way the Velcro actually works on these pads. So if you take a look, it almost folds over like a book. So that makes a B, and then a V, and then you actually trap the elastic lace in there like so, and keeps it very tight, versus the older smart straps had the same kind of tech as the pro laces, where it's just 2 pieces that came together. Brine's changed this design to improve, you know, how secure it stayed. I never had an issue with my original smart straps, but it is nice to see that, you know, they did try and improve the product. And I do know, you know, a few people had that issue. Again, it wasn't something I encountered, but still nice to know they took into account some user feedback and improved the product. So if we take a look here on the pads, one of the other differences for the Brines pads now is that the Optic is going to come in 2 different versions. You can see mine say Fly Core right there, which denotes that I got the Fly Core. Fly is going to be a stiffer version of the pad with a stiffer thigh rise and less torsional flex, so it's going to play more like the older Sub-Zero model. And there's also something called a Flex Core, which is a much more flexible pad up top in the thigh rise and torsionally, which is going to play more like the older genetic model. And one of the reasons Brines did this is that they incorporated a lot of new tech into the Optic. And the reason it's not called a Genetic 4 or Sub-Zero 4 is that literally every piece within this pad is a new design other than like the Smart Strap. And all of the tooling to make it is new, so it's a completely new thought process. And based on the kind of traditional release cycle Brines had, the Sub-Zero was due to be upgraded. And Brines didn't want to come out with such a revolutionary new pad and then have all the guys that like the soft pad have to wait and go and do custom orders if they wanted to incorporate Optic features onto a Genetic 3. So they basically changed the way they're doing it, and this is Optic, and you can get it in a flexible model, which again is the Flex Core and will play more like the older Genetic, or you can get the Fly Core, which will play more like the Sub-Zero. And in just a little bit, we will compare the Optic to the Genetic, just so you can see how the different flex is torsionally and everything else. So next, let's move to the inner gusset of the pad, aka the sliding surface. So this is one area that Brines put a lot of work in and completely redesigned the pad. So you'll notice you can kind of see in the light that you've got this checkerboard material in there. I've said it a couple times already, but if you're not familiar with it from older Brines products, or you're kind of new to looking at a Brines pad for the first time, this is what they call their Primo Material. And this material does not feel anything like a traditional Gen Pro. And this is something that savvy guys doing custom orders and the pros have been doing on their pads for the last couple of years. But it's a very smooth surface. So if we really zoom in on this material here, you can see the light reflects off it very, very well. It's a shiny material and it doesn't really have any grain to it in the sense that a Gen Pro is going to be like a faux leather. So let's take a look at the genetic pads just to see if we can get that on the camera and kind of highlight what some of the differences. So if I rub my finger here just across the older genetic pad, you can actually feel a little bit of grip and a little bit of friction, and that's because of the texture that's inherent in the material itself. You know, Gen Pro is a faux leather and it's almost got a leather-like texture to it, so it's going to grip and cause friction versus when we get in on this material, you know, you can just kind of see how easily my fingers glide over it. And if you've ever had your chance to run your finger across this in the store, you'll notice instantly touching it, it's a huge difference. So this is one part of what Brines is calling Optus Slide, and we can see the logo there. The second big change is that this whole inner surface is completely bindingless. And if we look at the older genetic pad, we will see that we've got the binding in there. Removing the binding is going to improve the wear on the pad. We've got more leather that's a heavier duty material, Primo, but the leather-like material. It's going to be much heavier duty material than the nylon, so it shouldn't wear out. It's not going to grab snow for you, so if you don't get the Zamboni all that often, it's not going to slow you down later in the games. And again, the texture. The third component that makes up the Optus Slide is they used harder foams in this section of the pad and on the inner gussets, so it's more firm when you land, and it's going to give you a much more controlled slide, a much better seal, and really should improve the slide. So we've actually done some shootouts on the goalnet.com between the EF3 with the speed skin and the Bauer One S, which has the core skin technology, and it's pretty well the consensus that the 1S outslides the EF3. So I'm really excited to get into this Brines pad and see how well it slides, because I currently am using the 1S, and we'll compare those leg channels a little bit more in a minute. So one feature that may not have come across very clearly in social media is the outer roll design. If you've only seen these pads in pictures, you can see that there's a seam there and it looks like there's an outer roll. However, if we get up close and personal with this, we can see that the outer roll is basically eliminated on this pad. You look at it at the top there, and then now at the bottom, if I put my thumb in there, I mean, it doesn't even take up like half of my thumb. It's a very, very small pad there on the outer roll. And the reason that Brines did this is that the outer roll is basically old technology. It serves no purpose on the pad. Years and years ago, when pads were made from stuffed deer here or shredded foam, this thick outer roll actually provided some vertical stability and helped the pad stand up and hold its shape. But now that the pads are made from a solid core like Brines engineered e-foams, the pad stands up on its own, and this big bulky pad here just increases the weight. So if we saw before on the Optic, you know, it takes up like half my thumbnail. Here we're almost up to my knuckle. So you can see that this is a very beefy outer roll, which is pretty standard, and Brines is moving away from that and trying to usher us into the next era of modern pads. And we'll go side by side here with the genetic. All right, so now we take a look at them side by side, and you can see how much bigger the outer roll is on an older genetic pad, just to shed some light when we say that there's really no outer roll in the Optic. It's basically gone there. So in addition to the weight saving benefits, it's actually got a visual benefit as well. So let's turn the pad on the side and take a look at it from the standpoint of the butterfly. So when I'm down doing my butterfly, there's going to be significantly less material here, like maybe a ½ inch. So that means that if I'm trying to find a puck down in my pads or looking over them like that, I'm going to have less material here, which is going to give me an unobstructed field of vision. So coming up this way and then both looking over it down that way. So that's one of the more subtle features of removing the outer roll, which helps quite a bit. And some people might say, well, the purpose of the outer roll is to reduce skip overs, and Brines has done their homework and figured out that they think the outer roll comes into benefit in 0.5% of shots. So that's less than 1 in 100 might go in, from skipping over your outer roll. So that is really a non-factor. So that's it's pretty cool. Be excited to see if I notice a difference there while using these pads on the ice. Some other things we can take a look at looking at this pad is Brines has used air mesh as well. Main function on these outer gussets is to give the pad just kind of a cool, rich look, more things to customize, and then also reduce weight. Versus using it out here on the outer wing, it's going to allow the pad to breathe more. And I mentioned we get to this in a little bit, but for anybody that was wondering, here's where my logo is on these pads. And this is something you'll see with the pros. Most guys have their number or a team logo embroidered out that way. And we've got the B-Star strap there and the logo. Really a cool looking outer wing right there. And that's one thing, like I mentioned it before, but I'll say it again. The reason this pad is called Optic is because it's completely new. And just touching it like you'd expect with Brine, I mean, there's not a stitch out of place. It just feels very rich. The materials are great. You hit it, it just feels solid. It's like closing the door in a luxury car. Just a really, really well-built pad. And for anybody that knows what little personal details I like to throw out there about myself, I am involved in the manufacturing industry and love that Brines put such a huge emphasis on keeping manufacturing in the North America. All right, so the next thing I want to take a look at is the pad weights. There's a couple things we probably need to review real quick before we dive into the pad weights, because unfortunately we're not quite perfectly comparing apples to apples. So the two reasons I say we're not quite comparing apples to apples with these pads is going to be in both the length and the height of the pads. So the width thing might catch some people off guards, and by showing the Bauer pad here, I don't mean to single them out. I'm wearing the 1S pad, and it's by no means perfect, but it really is a pretty good goal pad depending on what you're looking for and how long you expect to keep your pads. And they are also not the only people in the industry with a pad less than the NHL maximum of 11 inches, so I'd like to highlight that. And then secondly, my 1S pads are mediums, and I should probably be in a large, maybe an XL. I tried the XL at first before I didn't have the strapping dialed in, thought that it felt too big. And once I dialed in the strapping, I'm wondering if maybe I could go back to it. But point being that my pads from Bauer are a medium, which falls somewhere around a 33, 34 inch pad in traditional pad sizing, versus my Optic pads are a 35 plus 1.5. My genetic pads are a 35 plus 2, so we're looking at a 37 inch overall pad height and a 36.5 overall pad height. And I'll measure the Bauer pads just to kind of get a feel, but I'm guessing we're probably 1.5, 2 inches shorter. And just for easy math, if a pad's shorter, it has less foam in the core, it's going to reduce the weight. If a pad's more narrow, it's going to have less foam, it's going to reduce the pad weight. So you really need to put that in context before we get it on the scale. And if you're fully understanding what I'm outlining, I think the weight of the Optic is really, really going to improve. All right, so as you can see here, we're measuring the Optic in the front. And if we get down at just the right angle there, you can see that this pad is a perfectly 11 inches, and we'll also measure it across the back. And as we can see, the pad is perfectly 11 inches. All right, next up, we're looking at my OG genetic pads, which are about 5 years old, the Genetic 1. And as you can see, we are at the 11 inches there, and let's measure this one. All right, as you can see, we are perfectly at 11 inches here on this pad as well. All right, so last up, we are going to take a look at the 1S. And again, what you might find here might really shock you. And again, I don't mean to single out Bauer because there are a couple other people that are plagued by this. But as you can see, we're somewhere around 10.25, 10.5 inches on these pads. Anybody not liking my measurement there, get a little bit tighter. We can see just around the 10, and we will measure. As you can see here, measuring it on the back, we are just over 10 inches on this pad, so call it 10 and a half. So you're losing about a ½ inch of width on the Bauer pad, which is going to significantly make a difference on the weight. One good piece of news I've heard is that the 1X pad is fully 11 inches, so I commend Bauer on fixing that as well. I'm not sure if that was a shortcoming in a manufacturing process or exactly how that came to be, but again, good news from what I hear that's corrected on the 1X, and at the risk of sounding like a broken record, Bauer's not the only person with the less than 11 inch pad issue going on, so please keep that in mind. And 1S, again, is pretty decent pad. Not perfect, but I do like a lot about it, and it is definitely the best sliding pad currently on the market. We'll see if that changes when the Optic pad drops on November. So as best as I can here, I'm putting the Optic and the 1S side by side. Just zoom out one more time so you can see they are as close as I can get them. You've got knee blocks on the wall, but again, as close as I can. So this is where we are on top, and as you can see, there's a gap, so let me get the tape measure. All right, so let's get in here. Camera and filming everything at once. So we're going to say that the Bauer is about 2 inches shorter, which is pretty good. 34 plus 1 would be 35 inches. My Optic is a 35 plus 1.5, so 36.5, so 1.5, and then depending, different people measure them differently. I think it's safe for round numbers to call it a 2-inch pad. All right, so we're going to fire up the scale right now. All right, we can see that zeroed out, and we are measuring in pounds. So we're going to start with the oldest, which are my genetics, and these are highly customized. So these have some leather straps because as much as I'm a believer in the elastic now, I was a little reluctant to buy it first and kind of thought it might be a fad. So hey, you get things wrong every now and again. So taking a look at it, my genetics are weighing in at about 5.2 pounds. Next up, we will do the 1S. All right, so here we are throwing the 1S pads down on the scale. So as you can see, these come in at 4.6 pounds. And again, these are a lighter weight pad, and they're also a shorter pad than either of the Brines that we're going to look at. And next we will weigh. So we can see that the Optic are going to come in at 4.9 pounds. So they're about 3 ounces heavier than the Bauers, which they are 2 inches taller than, and ½ an inch, 3/4 of an inch thicker than, and they are about 3 ounces lighter than the older genetic pads. One thing to note is there is a difference between the fly core and the flex core in terms of the weight on the Goalie pad. The flex core is going to be made like the genetic. It is softer, it uses lighter weight foams in it, so you're going to save about 3 ounces going with the genetic pad, or genetic style pad, which is now the fly core. So the flex core. So if these pads were the flex core, they would actually weigh about 4.6 pounds and be the exact same weight as the Bauer 1S pads, which again are a couple inches shorter. And the Sub-Zero style Optic, which has the additional HD foams in it to make a stiffer pad, do increase the weight again by about 3 ounces, and that's why we were at 4.9 ounces. A friend of mine is Joey, who plays at Johnson & Wales Division III College in the US in Rhode Island, and he has a pair of Optic pads, which I believe are 33 inches, so similar, I guess, on the other side of the 1S, a little bit shorter, and he said his pads are down around 4 pounds. So you can see the Optic pad is sensationally light. Depending on the size, it's going to be right up there for the lightest pad on the market, or, again, right up there off by an ounce or two. So even though it's got a traditional construction, compared to the molded style with the 1S, it is an extremely lightweight pad. All right, so we're kind of on the final segment of the video tonight, and what we're going to do is compare the pads side by side, just kind of highlight some of the features and the differences. So if you have some older equipment, you might understand what you're getting into. First up, we're going to look at the genetic being the oldest, and you'll see that the pad shapes are actually relatively similar. So I initially had my order in because I have a genetic pad for the flex core and actually changed gears and went to the fly core after seeing Andy O'Connor's pads, who plays for the Admirals, because I just love the shape of it. And for anybody that saw my videos and thought I was crazy trying to shape the Bauer pad, really wasn't going for some dramatic S shape like some of Fleury's older pads. Just wanted a subtle shape, which this pad has. So I'm absolutely obsessed with the shape of this pad and really, really like it enough to, change my order after it was already in with Brines. The other thing I love about the Brines pads is the super thin thigh rise. So in addition to the obvious benefit of weight savings, this also gives you a lot of clearance between your pad, your knee guards, gloves during motion. So it allows me to wear the pads a little bit taller, which I like as well, to cover my 5-hole. So I really, really like that feature. If we like to look at my genetic, these are extremely customized, and it's kind of cool. The way my strapping system ended up is actually what CCM went with on the EF3. And obviously they didn't copy me, but it's just pretty cool validation for me to see that one of my crazy mod projects ended up being a very, very popular pad out there. So the first thing I customized was the sidewall. You can see this is nylon versus this is the matte Gen Pro material. I did that to reduce weight, left the feature there just to highlight the Genetics internal knee rolls, and I thought it gave it a cool vintage look. And then lastly, I have the 2 straps. So my pad, I run a leather strap through the knee block down to the back and across the top, and I've got one Velcro here, and I've got a Velcro calf wrap as well, and that's how I wear my pads. I did upgrade the pads and went with a Maltese knee landing and 45-degree knee block, which does have the landing wedge there. You can actually get in there and see the stitches. I actually cut out the knee cradle that went with the pad and cut out the outer flap because I love the open knee cradle. One of the things I do like on these pads, which actually talking to Chris from Brines, is one of the options he gets on his, is keeping the SBA non-slip grip material. So be curious to see how I like going from the SBA to the all nylon. The all nylon is going to rotate better, so it should be a nice feel, but we'll take a look. So we've got that there and in there, and then both pads have the signature Brines elastic going through the knee wing. One of the biggest differences, aside from me being an idiot and not ordering smart straps, is that pad I showed you earlier. So my Genetics do not have the pad right there, versus the Brines have this extra air pillow on the newer Optic, which you can take out. So definitely excited to see how that plays out. Like I said earlier with the knee block, I love a cushy landing, so I think that's a feature I'm really, really going to like. And past that, pretty similar. Again, a newer weight savings technique here using the nylon versus the older pads had the weave going all the way through them. And if we take a look at the flexibility, this will be one of the other biggest differences. Is the looking at the knee blocks themselves. As I mentioned, the Brines has the 45-degree knee block here with the Primo, and it is their biggest knee block ever. You can take a look at my genetic one here, which I modded with the monster pad with the Maltese gel inside and the Maltese to the knee landing. You just notice looking at them, you can probably even see from this vertical angle, but I'll take a side one, how beefy this extended landing surface is. And if you hit it, it's super hard with nice HD foam versus the monster one. Little squishy and really just doesn't have, you can hear it's soft versus the hard there. So Brian's really perfected that design. And one of the reasons they're able to get the nice 3D shape is that they actually put a seam there, so that really locks that in place. And when you jump overhead, you can really see that. So it's really going to give you a nice, stable landing surface. So this is one of the more subtle features, as well as that laced-in knee block. I'm really excited to test. Versus on the older customized genetic, that wedge piece is there, but it's not as dramatic and not as pronounced as it is on the Optic. So it's another nice feature in terms of the new materials, new design that make Optic the new pad that it is. So if you take a look at the genetic, it is pretty dramatic how much you can actually flex this pad. Again, apologies on a little bit of camera work. You know, I'm just a gear nut making these videos for people to see, to preview the Optic. I don't have a professional camera crew like some of the other videos. I appreciate your patience on this, but you can see super, super flexible. And then as well, torsionally. On this. Very, very flexible pad. So if you like that, you know, I would definitely recommend going with the fly core, or excuse me, the flex core over the fly core. The flex core is going to play more like the traditional genetic, and the fly core will play more like the... All right, so now let's take a look at the Optic. You can see it flexes, but it is firmer. It does not quite flex quite the same as the genetic. And then if we look at it kind of torsionally, you know, you can see, I don't know how well it comes across in the video, but you know, it's more moving down at the boot, and the pad itself is actually staying very stable, where with the genetic pad, you can really move it side to side a little bit because it's a softer pad. And that's not, you know, one being better than the other. That's strictly a preference. I wore Reeboks for a long time, the genetics and then the 1S, and I've kind of figured out I like a stiffer pad, but with the way the soft pads feel this way, or feel these days, you know, they seal so well, you're not losing that much. And that's why my order was initially in for flex core, even though I was kind of on the fence. And again, after seeing O'Connor's and deciding to go with the stiffness based on the shape, really excited about this pad. All right, so last up here is the Optic versus the 1S. I'm going to show a little bit more because these pads are very, very different, even though they're both extremely lightweight and both build to slide very, very well. First thing you'll notice is the Bauers don't have a single seam on the pad. They use the core skin technology where the outer coating is wrapped directly into the molded foam core versus the Brines pad is built with a traditional Craftsman-like approach where there's multiple panels coming together to make the pad's outer surface. And the Bauer pad is going to be all of the core skin versus the Brines. We've got different materials placed where they're designed to function properly. So if we dive down, one of the biggest differences will be the shape. So the Optic pad is rounder in the knee and up through the thigh rise versus the Bauer pad is very straight. So I would quantify the Bauer pad as like a Z shape. So if we take a look at this, it's very straight like a Z versus the Optic is very round like an S. It's a more organic shape. And that was the shape I was trying to gun for with my Bauer pads. Initially, when I had the XL set, don't need a big giant S curve, just a little bit more than what I'm getting with the Bauers, which I absolutely hit a home run with on the Optics. You can see I modded the leg channel here and cut the elastic knee lock through the knee landing, just like it is on the Brines. Love that feature. Also went with a shorter strap here because I felt like the pad was a little too loose. And like I was saying with elastic, I like the pad to be nice and secure. As we dive into the leg channel, you're going to see two different approaches to all elastics. You know, Brines is going off their smart strap technology. Bauer's doing the CRS. This is another mod I made of my Bauers just because I found the strap to be a pain in the butt, and I also found it too loose to really function. So we hacked this and made a little mod strap where this is going to operate essentially like an elastic professor strap and be much easier to put on in the locker room as well. Other differences here as well are going to be in the inner edge. The Bauer pad has a traditional binding which has gone away for the 2S, and then there's also this weird design I never quite understood where the inner landing area is recessed and inside off the pad's inner gusset versus the Brines pad, it's flat, and even on my older genetics. So it's going to give you a much more stable landing surface, much more comfortable landing surface. This is another design element Bauer has fixed for the 2S pad. But generally speaking, like I was saying earlier, if you rub both of these pads, they're both very, very slick. And I think there's a really good chance that Optic is going to slide as well as, or potentially even better than 1S. But got to get on the ice. You know, it's all just kind of a guess at this point in time. But one, I cannot wait to get out there and test. So one last thing we need to do in terms of pads comparisons is try and look at the flex between the 1S and the Optic. I think that might be a little bit more interesting than the genetic. This is extremely difficult, in my opinion, to show in the video, especially without having a cameraman, like I mentioned earlier, filming behind me. But let's try and take a look. Before we even do this, I've tested this off to the side, and I will say that the Optic Flex is more flexible than the Bauer. One of the reasons, in my opinion, is probably due to the thinner thigh rise. And it's great because you get that stiffness, I think, just kind of anticipating using, but you're gonna get that stiffness that I'm gonna like in the upper thigh, but just a little bit more give. But anyway, we will try and flex these as best we can to show in the video. So here again is the flex on Optic. So, you know, that is the fly core, but that still moves pretty well. And then here is the 1S. So you can see it gives, but again, I guess you can't feel it the way that I can, but it is not quite as smooth as the Optic, but it does give a bit more than probably if you've never seen it up close, that you may have read about, because a lot of people seem to really kind of overemphasize how stiff the 1S is. But again, Optic is a much more balanced approach with the fly core, which is the stiffer of the two options. And this angle actually works pretty well, so maybe we'll mix the genetic back in for 1 second. Okay, so here is genetic, and you can see how much that flexes just in comparison with 1S. And I'll do Optic one more time. Hopefully everybody kind of memorized what the 1S looked like. So it gives for sure, but just not as dramatic as the genetic, but definitely more flexible than. So here we are at the end of today's video. Again, thanks for everybody from watching. Hopefully the cleaner formatting made this worthwhile for anybody that's watching a second time after watching the Facebook Live version. Feel free to screen capture any of these images, share them as you want. You know, the purpose of me looking at the Optic pads now is to get as much information out there as we can ahead of the product's launch. I think really the only thing we didn't touch on is, you know, a little bit of the differences in ordering fly core versus flex core. Traditionally, when you ordered a Brines, you could order like a 3-2-1 configuration, which would specify the brake at the boot, the brake at the knee, and the brake at the thigh rise. Brines has gone away from that. So you get your flex core, you get your fly core, and then the one thing you still pick is the flex at the boot. And I went with the Hyperflex 5. My old pads there were a 3, so I haven't used a boot this soft before. So this is something I'm really interested in looking at. And then lastly, probably the one custom option I have on my pad that would be, you know, the most different from retail, as everybody can imagine, the customized smart toe straps aren't going to be a whole lot different, is my boot brake angle. The flex core pad will come with the genetic boot brake angle, which is 80 degrees, and the fly Optic core pad will come with a 90-degree boot. The one other difference Brines has, which is what I have equipped here, is in the middle, and this is what they call their 84-degree boot brake. So the reason for going kind of in the middle is that I'm going to get a nice square flat sealing surface, which I like, which is kind of what you could expect out of the 90-degree. But it does give me a little bit more relief to dig in that edge and get up in and out of the butterfly, which is why you'd want the 80 degrees. That 84 is really a nice middle ground. But if I had to say which one it's more similar to, it's going to fall more in line with the 90-degree, which will be stock on the fly. So putting the genetic and the Optic side by side here, we can kind of get a feel for the different boot brakes. So if you look at those straight on and imagine them forming a triangle, you'll notice that this edge comes out much more, and that edge is much more flat, and the 90-degree would look even more straight up and down, kind of like this on the Optic pad, which again will be standard on the fly core, and the flex core will have the same as the genetic style. And just for reference, while we have the 1S pads out, you can take a look at them side by side with the Optic. In my opinion, I don't think Bauer talks too much about them, but you can see the boot flexes, or excuse me, the boot angles are pretty similar. If we look, you know, the angles on the side of that imaginary triangle that I'd be forming like that are pretty similar. So that should be a pretty, you know, design I'm kind of used to after wearing the 1S pads for the last few. So again, want to thank everybody for tuning in. Hope you found this video worthwhile. If you have any questions, head over to thegoalnet.com, post them in the Brines forums, and one of the members or somebody from the Brines company themselves will actually answer these questions. We'll be skating in these pads a couple times next week, so by the end of next week, pretty much coinciding with the launch of these pads, expect my initial review to be out there. Thanks very much, and have a great